Sorry, we're coming back on there. Okay, so welcome back to Cheche. Now, you'd be forgiven for thinking that the only thing that happens in Kenya is elections. But an opinion piece in this morning's national newspapers warns us to brace ourselves for hard economic times. Why? Because of the circumstances we find ourselves in, with a scheduled repeat election, the Supreme Court delivering its full judgment on the presidential election petition later this morning, and a standoff over the IEBC. Our guests this morning are Dr. Habil Olaka, speaking for KEPSA, Stephen Mutoro, speaking for COFEC, the Consumer Federation of Kenya, and Nzetse Were, a development economist. And so before the break, we painted this macro picture of our economy and how it performs in response to elections. So let's drill down now and come down to, I mean, if I were to ask you this first, the piece I referred to went out this morning by Jaindi Kisero in The Nation, and he reminds us of our political culture of mass action, strikes, and boycotts, and he tells us that our economy is too fragile for this. But we still hear this. In the week that there was no economic activity, you heard that in the informal settlements people were not able to eat because they buy food daily. So when we say that the economy is not performing, what does this mean for people who, for instance, don't have fridges in their homes, who survive on daily labor? What are we saying? What are we doing to ordinary Kenyans?
I think, let's just contextualize this conversation. I think we all agree that during an election year, things get very difficult. But I don't think Kenyans are beginning to understand how the difficulty of this year has just been exacerbated by the elections. When you look at the informal settlements, when you look at SMEs, when you look at where Kenyans sit in terms of employment, 90% of this country's employed people sit in the informal economy. We don't have an informal economy strategy. We don't have policy around it. We don't have structures to try and generate income for that sector. So this is a structural problem, fundamentally, that goes on year after year after year. And then when elections happen, the situation of most Kenyans is exacerbated by the fact that investors don't want to spend money, people don't want to walk around because of security concerns, and people ramp down their spending. So I think we need to understand that beyond elections, what people go through in the slums and what people go through in their SMEs and in their informal businesses, those who are self-employed, that is what warrants the attention as well. And that we can't keep on using these people as an example of how the elections mess up the economy, when the reality is that they're living in difficult times year in, year out, because there's no strategic decision being made on how to improve their lot. So for me, I get very frustrated when everything is linked to elections, that, oh, people aren't eating. People don't eat every day anyway, So it's been exacerbated by the elections, but there's a fundamental problem with the way our economy is structured that just gets completely sidelined when it's an election year. I was talking in a panel yesterday, and I said, if this wasn't an election year, would we not be interrogating the economics? Would we not be having a bit more of a sophisticated conversation around why is our economy structured the way it is? Why is it that we still have so many people living below the poverty line? But somehow, when it's election year, we stop that analytical thinking and we begin to link everything to the elections. And I think that is the mindset problem that we have. And I think private sector particularly could do a lot more in communicating to markets, in communicating to government, in communicating to Kenyans that they're here, they're not going anywhere, and that when the elections are over, they'll still be present. I think we need to be a bit more deliberate around the narrative we're creating in the country.
That's a challenge for you, Habil, but first let's see.
I think, talking micro, I think we need to look at, and I'm so happy that KEPSA had a meeting, the head of state. I think during such a meetings, the market, because when the market sneezes, they say the consumer will catch cold. So I think for me it will be interesting that during those kind of meetings the private sector holds the round table with the president. I think the private sector should stop being cheerleaders. I think they should tell the president...
Cheerleaders?
Yeah, sort of, because by the way, there's a thin line between private sector and politics in this country. Very thin lines. At some point, it's almost... they appear like they're part of, they're part of the political wing of whatever, the leadership. But for me, that is not the point. The point is, during those kind of closed-door meetings, the private sector need to tell the head of the government and state, categorically, that he must make sure that he cushions the market. How? I think the bad manners, if I may say, in government, where people talk about things that are actually going to affect the market, they should be able to refrain that, so that we can also have some good news from government. And because if we continue with this kind of talk, particularly with the president pronouncing himself, for example, on remarks that border on his probably lack of faith in institutions or individuals running institutions like judiciary, that is dangerous. And talking micro, if the market is affected, the gentlemen and ladies that walk 5 kilometers every morning to industrial area or to other places to work simply have no job. If they have no job, you know, they wait at the gates after evening. If they cannot earn that kind of a wage of 200 shillings, and remember, they are the people who run the Kadogo kind of economy. If those people are not really doing business, then are we talking about the market only at the level of middle income and the high income? I think for me that would be a fallacy. We need to really address the issues, because as a consumer defender, one of the things I've never talked about is not to look at the role of the market in terms of consumption. So if the market is affected, we are affected. If the people in that area are not getting jobs, who's going to buy that kind of product that they manufacture, sugar, whatever it is? Who's going to use the Safaricom or Airtel kind of calls? Those are the people who need the 200 shillings to run the market. So I think going back to the basics is that private sector must be cushioned to make jobs for people, and making jobs for people that will also enable them to have money or power now to be able to consume what is in the market.
Hadil, several challenges for you there, and Zata and Stephen seem to both be agreeing on a number of issues, one of which is your apparent closeness to the political status quo.
I think maybe just to respond to what Stephen is trying to allude to, I think as KEPSA we play a specific role in terms of trying to bring in the link between the private sector and the establishment.
Well, he accused you of cheerleading.
Now, that cheerleading comment, I think, is inappropriate, because it's not true. I think we have had a number of engagements at various levels, including the Presidential Roundtable, where we bring up issues that have been filtered in from the private sector at the highest table ever possible. And these issues are discussed, and solutions are therefore derived therefrom for purposes of carrying the economy forward. So to allude that we are having some inappropriate kind of engagements, I think is just uncalled for.
But isn't it a fact that a number of captains of industry in this country are very close to the system? I don't know. You can only see them traveling together, doing all kind of things. And we know them.
I think that is now going to individuals, which I would not want to, because those individuals possibly are not even linked to KEPSA as an institution.
They actually are linked to KEPSA as an institution.
So, but I think to allude that that's the body of KEPSA, I think is inappropriate. Yeah, I would distance myself from that kind of a comment. But I think, having said that, let's look at it in terms of the fact that, for example, right from 2016, all the way to 2017, I think we can see, for example, the credit growth, which is a major indicator to the economic growth rate, has been slowing down quite progressively, all the way up to, I think the latest figure we saw was close to 1.6% credit growth, up from 20% in the early 2016. Now, that in itself it just happens that also it happens to have been an election year, and so it was in a way exacerbated by the fact that it's an election year, and so things slowing down. But ideally, there was already a slowdown in terms of economic growth rate, and I think I'll agree with where the fact that that is the kind of interrogation we should be trying to do in terms of why was the economic growth rate slowing down, and why was the credit growth, for example, slowing down, which is affecting the economic growth rate. And there are a number of factors that you can attribute to it, and one of them, of course, is is the laws that were passed, which have significantly impacted the ability of the private sector to play its role in terms of providing credit to the productive sectors of the economy.
Okay, so this is what our viewers are saying, and remember, the question we asked our viewers is how this, prolonged election season is affecting them. So it's affected me very badly. I was supposed to sell a house in Diani this month. The person, a foreigner, said he will come after elections. The matters surrounding this electioneering season are very grave. Our political leaders have intentionally chosen to put us at a standstill. I run a video and photography studio. For 3 months now, no clients at all, because people are afraid to stage events. What's even more disturbing is SMSs and threats that touch on tribal lines. Our political class leaders must sober up, put pride and greed down, and come to the table for talks. Mwananchi is being played. And that's something we haven't quite discussed, the election season and the ramifications on cohesion. The challenge is that some two societies, communities believe that the presidency is their entitlement and domain. Kenyans are tired. That comes from Mugambi. Nakuru judiciary, Maina in Nakuru, the judiciary, opposition and the government, everyone is speaking in the name of Wanjiku. Can we give Wanjiku to speak with the voice of her vote? Good morning, William. Our current economic climate has been as a result of a combination of factors. Key among them is a big reduction in access to credit, which you all alluded to, caused by the capping of rates. Many investors, especially in construction, have postponed massive projects until after the elections. Other counties have sacked officials dealing with approvals. People are reading the political situation, especially the Chinese, who are pro-government. So you can see it's taking a toll on individuals, varying levels. If you subsist on daily wages, you don't have access to labor, and so therefore wages, and so therefore you don't eat. When Zetsa, you were making the point that even with or without elections, there are people who struggle to make a living. But even people running their own businesses are saying that because of the climate of anxiety, which we've discussed here, people are not willing to engage. And
I completely agree. I mean, I've seen it in the businesses that I work with, is that contracts started drying up around June, July. Okay, the first half of the year was kind of okay because people are like, oh, it's going to be an election, and but when as we got closer and closer to the election, payments aren't being made. People don't want to pay for work that's been contracted. Clients are not coming in for new business. And so we're really seeing a situation where, as usual, it's the small and medium enterprises, the engine of the economy, that is being negatively affected. If you look at the larger corporate companies, they have the financial resources and the financial cushions to get themselves through this period, but it's often the SMEs, the informal economy and the self-employed that are the first ones to be sacrificed when things get a bit difficult economically. And I think going forward, we need to have a strategy as a country on looking at elections year a bit more strategically, because we have this conversation each election year, oh, we've been affected, but we need to start anticipating some of these things where, SMEs, for example, know that they need to have certain financial buffers in place during an election year. They need to be ready that things are going to slow down, and particularly, people to understand that we are also part of the problem. One of the problems that we're having, and I was having a discussion with investors yesterday, is that investors aren't going anywhere. They may say it's an election year and they're slowing down, but they're going to be here. And I think one of the problems that I'm having is that we are not generating a counter-narrative to this narrative of election.
And what does that counter-narrative look like?
That counter-narrative would be investors are here. Investors are not going to leave Kenya. They're not going to divest out of Kenya. And that Kenya is a stable country, relatively speaking, particularly in the context of the East African community. If you look at our neighbors, be it Ethiopia or Rwanda or Tanzania, there are many sort of credible institutional processes, structures. Our financial markets are quite deep. Our economy is still chugging along at about 5%, and I think that's probably where we're going to sit this year. We're going to sit about 5%.
I thought the World Bank had revised the projection down to 4.7 or something like that.
I think if we hit 5%, we're lucky, but I do know 4.7 is what we grew at Q1. So let's be clear that that was what we grew at Q1 was 4.7%. And I think we need to understand that, the elections do have a negative impact on the economy, but there are things that we could be doing anyways to make the economy grow even bigger. Because now, this year, we're not even going to talk about Vision 2030 and our ambition to grow at 10% per year, because we're busy talking about how elections are having a negative and problematic effect. So I think we get distracted, and there are structural issues that need to be addressed. That
I think I agree with Cheche on the fact that we fail to plan as business, as government for an election year. And I say so specifically, for example, the insurance sector. What does it do to cushion, do we have, for example, a cover for an election year because you'll not be doing very well? I think for me that's one of the questions that we need to ask. Even the sector itself, is it really accountable in terms of delivering its job? But having said that, I think the issue is not, Udwak, about whether the investors are leaving Kenya or not leaving Kenya. By the Kenya is a great country. Anybody wants to invest in Africa, I think Kenya naturally is a very, very good country. And we are also very resilient people. So the issue is not about investors leaving. The issue is about them slowing down. And there are basics. Because this is the only country, for example, when during an election period, and I've seen this specifically for this election, when you see policymakers literally take a break from their job, when you see cabinet secretaries, when you see principal secretaries actually on a campaign trail, the question is, when are they going to do their job? So, and we are talking so many things, but the basic things like people heading policy in this country, when they engage in politics. One of the viewers talked about the issue of cohesion. In this country, when you appear on a national television, I think the next question would be, people will not be looking at the content of what you're saying. They are looking at what is your second name. Somebody talked about your second name will betray you. So now that has gone into business.
Actually, to buttress that point, is COFEC using this as a political forum to bash the government?
Not really. I think we're just being honest. A debate like Cheche is not the one of being flowery. I think for me, I respect this program. And we're just actually speaking out. Because by the way, you can talk politics by praising the president. I was here last time, and I really praised the government on one thing. That during the time when the late Ngaiseri was the Minister for Internal Security, government had not really communicated the fact that he did very well on security. During his tenure, we didn't have a major problem. So, the issue is not about that, and that confirms what you're saying, because we don't look at the substance of issues. And if we are not open to criticism, as a government, as private sector, as COFEC, as anybody else, then the status quo may be maintained. So for me, it's not about bashing government, it's not about praising government. I think we need to peg, to look at where it hurts us most. And I've been here saying, it's important that we cushion the market. Because if we cushion the market, then we are also actually helping government. Because if we are talking about an election year, we are talking about a private sector that has regular meetings with the president. The question then would be, what are the key deliverables, for example, that dialogue has had, in terms of cascading now that to the ordinary mwananchi in terms of pricing? The other day, maybe in conclusion, Woodwork, if you allow me, I was very disappointed when none other than the governor of Central Bank took a platform and was saying, look, ladies and gentlemen, the rate caps have not worked, so we are going to reverse them. Now, if that is not impunity, what is it? Because the rate caps came as a result of an amendment of the Banking Act of 2016. To the best of my knowledge, he was opposed to it from the word go. Now, he went and told investors, look, he went and told the investors, we're going to reverse it. Of course, he can only make a proposal to cabinet through treasury. But the point is, when you have a governor of central bank in public broad daylight saying he's going to reverse what he has no power to reverse, what does that constitute? I think we need to be honest. We need to be accountable as public officers and state officers in this country.
Okay, this side of the table is shaking its head. Havel, the last time we had you on the show, you put up a robust and spirited defense against the rate caps, and I believe you and in fact, I think we had
both of them are here.
And so we've gone on to rate caps. But wouldn't that, I think the cynics would say the rate caps were an election gimmick.
Absolutely. This was a populist narrative that was generated during an election year, knowing that this was the best way to get this sort of cap effected. You know what I find very interesting about Kenyans is that they don't believe you can have an intellectual position because you believe in that. It's always you're being paid by someone to think what you're thinking. I think when you look at sort of the commentary, I was among those who said we're going to see a contraction in liquidity because of this interest rate cap. Whether you think that's right or wrong, or banks are being coercive, or, you know, that's beside the point. The reality is that what we had anticipated is exactly what is happening. And that's why when you see a governor of the central bank in Kenya, who's a very accomplished and intelligent individual, raising concerns about the cap, why don't you look at the intellectual merit of that argument rather than singing songs about how he's being paid by so-and-so to make his position? And I think that's one of the fundamental...
He hasn't quite paid.
No, I'm not saying that that's what he's saying. I'm not saying that's what he's saying. But there is a narrative. When I was talking about the interest rate cap from a developmental point of view, because as a development economist, I look at the role that SMEs play in economic productivity and the engine of economic growth in terms of absorbing labor and all of these macroeconomic realities that make people either eat or not eat. And when I was looking at the interest rate cap from that point of view, I said it is the SMEs that are going to be hit. It is the self-employed, it is the informal economy, and it is the SMEs that are going to be hit by this cap. And that's why I was advising against it. Me, I was told how I've been paid by banks to push that position. And this is one of the things that I really despise that we do as a country. We're intellectually lazy. Rather than interrogating an argument and saying, is this individual's argument robust or not? Instead of doing that, we go to the easy option of Amelipwa. That one has been paid to say what she's saying, rather than interrogating the argument. And I think for me, one of the broader concerns this happens that goes on in an election year is that we extend that to politics. Rather than interrogating the arguments that one opposition is making or that government is making and looking at the lucidity of their statements, we're going to sit there and say, oh, we are Nongea hivi because he's in tribe A and in tribe B. And I think that's oversimplification of intelligence in our country is a fundamental flaw, and we're intellectually dishonest and we're lazy and we don't interrogate our issues and attribute it to all one thing, that this is why the economy isn't growing this year is because of the elections. If you look at the hit the economy took at the beginning of the year, about 30% of our GDP is linked to agriculture. We took a major hit with the drought. People are still not recovering from that. Another big thing is about 10% of our GDP comes from financial services. We've seen that sector being hit. So whether we're in an election year or not, 40% of our GDP was fundamentally compromised this year, whether it's an election year or not. And we're not interrogating that. We're busy singing songs of how people are being paid to say this and being paid. So for me, I'm very frustrated by that narrative.
I think let me just say one thing, that it's unfortunate for the name of the governor to be dragged into such an argument in a negative light. I think the governor was very clear in terms of the fact that the evidence available on the impact of this law is not supporting the economy. And I think that's where he was coming from. So he was saying that there is enough evidence on the ground for us to start thinking about the law that was passed. He did not allude to the fact that he was going to amend it as it's being proposed. I think he doesn't have the power to do that, and he knows it. And so he cannot step that line to say that I'm going to amend the law. But having said that, I think as an industry, we know why that law was passed. There was a genuine concern, the fact that the rates in the market were high. And so what have we done after the law was passed? We have, as an industry, tried to address the issues that were raised during the debate on that law. Some of the issues, we actually brought them out during the debate, but they were not taken into consideration because at that point in time, the only thing in sight was the law. We bring in legislation and the problem will be resolved. We have seen the impact. Now, what you have done basically, together with the central bank, we have, for example, put up a website, a platform where consumers can be able to compare pricing across the industry, the so-called the cost of credit website. So any consumer can pick on any specific bank, any particular product, and compare across the whole sector. So that's trying to introduce some transparency in the way banks price their products. The other one is trying to strengthen, for example, the credit information sharing, the so-called CRB, because CRB was meant to support the market in terms of being able to differentiate between pricing across the whole spectrum. Now, what has happened is that initially, because of the way it was introduced, it has more or less been perceived as a blacklist rather than something that is meant to support the market. So we are trying to work on that to ensure that banks can then be able to adopt the credit scores to price the loan so that you can have a differentiated pricing across the scale, depending on how good a performer you are in terms of your credit history. So as these things come into place and we try to open it up to ensure that some of the inefficiencies that were there in the market which led to the high interest rates are addressed, we can now start having a discussion in terms of how do we remove these price controls that were put there, which are obviously not working. So, and I think that's where the governor was coming from, and in that we're in total agreement with him, that we need to unlock some of the challenges that we're having in the way it was implemented so that we can have a more effective credit market. Okay.
Mutege, you argued robustly for the rate caps. We find ourselves in the situation, prolonged electioneering. We're told that loans, the number of non-performing loans has surged. Access to credit has been, restricted. Would you say, therefore, that things are okay, that it was wrong, that, it feels an odd time, I think.
I am not an economist.
You're not an economist.
But I've read in today's paper, some of the utterances made by the governor of Central Bank is that big companies in construction, in housing, the big companies are the ones with the loans that are not payable, which has increased from this year. So, and since I'm not an economist, they may explain to me why those big companies are not able to pay. And like Monanchi, and SMEs.
Let me say, when you're talking about individual companies,
we'll take a break after that.
Okay, we can't sit here and comment on individual companies because we don't know about their financial situation. I mean, broadly speaking, whether you're a big company or a small company, one of the biggest problems that private sector has in this country is getting paid by government. It's a fundamental problem. And there's an argument that if government just paid private sector what it owed, that would be an economic stimulus in and of itself. So. Internal dynamics.
But if I can just maybe add on to that.
Let's come back to that point because we've got to take a break now. This is Cheche. We're live on Citizen TV. Please send your questions and opinions about how the prolonged electioneering season is affecting you, your education, your wallet, your business. Our SMS number is 22422, or you can reach us on Twitter using the hashtag Cheche.